You're waiting for the right cue, right?
Yeah. Couple minutes. All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Will. I'm a winter naturalist here at the Aspen Center for Environmental Studies. And thank you all for being here tonight for Naturalist Nights. Each winter, ACES partners with Wilderness Workshop and the Roaring Fork Audubon Society to co-host these Naturalist Nights. This free winter series featuring experts from across the country who explore different topics about the natural world with our community. Talks will be hosted every other week, Wednesdays at the 3rd Street Center in Carbondale and Thursdays here at Holland Lake. We would like to thank our generous sponsors that help make Naturalist Nights a possibility. Thank you especially to tonight's presenting sponsor, Clark's Market, and our other gold level sponsors, Reese Henry and Ken Ransford, as well as our silver level sponsors, Aspen Square, Ute Mountaineer, Blazing Adventures, Cripple Creek Backcountry, Two Leaves and a Bud, Aspen Ski Company, Bonfire Coffee, The Village Smithy, and Bristlecone Mountain Sports. These businesses are really helpful to us. They make these nights a possibility, especially the cookies and tea that we have outside. So Grassroots TV will join us, or Grassroots TV is live streaming tonight's presentation on their website, Wilderness Workshop, and the ACES Facebook page and YouTube channel. A cleaned up recording will be available in a couple days on our YouTube channel. And we hope you'll join us next week for our Potbelly Perspective from the Black Forest to the Black Sea, 1,900 miles across Europe on human-powered bikes with Pamela and Craig Mackey. And in 2 weeks for our next Naturalist Night, the first ascent over 10,000 years of Native American occupation in the Colorado mountains with Jason LaBelle. And now I'm excited to introduce tonight's speaker, Dr. Stewart Breck. Dr. Breck is a research wildlife biologist with the USDA-Wildlife Services National Wildlife Research Center, as well as the assistant director of the Center for Human Carnivore Coexistence at the Colorado State University, and is a member of the International Union for Conservation of Nature Bear Specialist Group, focused on human-bear conflict mitigation. His work focuses on doing the science and outreach that enhances His work focuses on doing the science and outreach that enhances coexistence between large carnivores and people. Ongoing research is focused on coyotes, wolves, black bears, grizzly bears, jaguars, and polar bears with the goals of minimizing conflict, enhancing carnivore conservation, and enhancing human well-being and livelihood. He has been conducting research on black bears in urban areas of Colorado for over 18 years, with 6 of those years being in Aspen. And we are so excited for him to share his findings with us tonight. Please remember to hold your questions until after the presentation is over. We will hold a Q&A session. But at this point, thanks, and please welcome Dr. Stewart Breck.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. Okay, good. I'm getting some lights. I want to especially thank Wilderness Workshop and ACES for sponsoring this talk tonight and having me come out here. But also ACES really supported the work and my graduate students that worked on this project we're going to discuss about here in Aspen that occurred from 2006 to 2011. So a big shout out to ACES. So it's kind of in some ways coming home, but it's a complex homecoming that I'm going to explain in my presentation tonight. And that comes to the question of the title. So when I was coming up with the title, Jim and I went back and forth about whether the title I proposed was appropriate or not. And ultimately I got overridden, so the title that we will see here in a second. How do I get this going?
Oh, is that it right there?
Yeah.
It's just not on the screen.
Okay.
Plugged in here. Here we are. Okay, now how do I get it to project fully? There we go.
Cool.
Wait for it.
It's trying. There you go.
All right. And there's the title, right? Coexist. So I added a little bit. I wanted to specify, we're talking about urban areas, so urban areas being Aspen, but the part of the title that didn't make it up here was in an apology to the good people of Aspen. Okay, so add that to the end here. I'm like, what is this guy talking about? So we're going to get into that, and we're going to do some science of bears in these kind of urban environments, and that's my main purpose. But I also want to do a little bit of storytelling, okay? So I'm going to start with a story and end with a story. And hopefully the reason I'm trying to apologize to Aspen will become clear. Okay, once upon a time, there was a land full of predators. Then we came and we killed them. And life was simpler, though not nearly as interesting. Then arrived our first predator prophet. Does anybody know who this is? He's talked about a fierce green fire dying in their eyes. Aldo Leopold, that's right. Famous essay, Thinking Like a Mountain, and he was the one that really started really proposing to bring back the predators into our landscape. And we have. We've done that. This is a figure of wolf recovery. It only goes up through 2013, but it shows the projection of wolves and the population growth in Idaho, Wyoming, Montana primarily. Since this time, they've expanded into Oregon and Washington and California, and we all know they're starting to move into Colorado. So wolves have done well. We don't know exactly how many bears are in Colorado. We do know the growth has occurred since the 70s when we really stopped the persecution of them in the 70s. In fact, I was talking to Jim, and he said, when he first arrived here in 1995, that they saw very few bears in this area, and that has changed a lot, right? So bears are doing very well in Colorado. Coyote range has expanded dramatically since really, Europeans first started settling the United States. Coyotes are doing well. Other species doing well as well. So then arrived our second predator prophet, and he pointed out coyotes, Fred's Coyote Farm and Doreen's Nursery, and he wrote Trouble Brewing. Okay, so this prophet is Gary Larson. And I interpret that as things are going to get a little weird, okay? And this is just an example of things getting a little weird. This is in Yosemite, and this is how I started my work with black bears. Back in the early 2000s, I was there helping the park develop some tools to deal with their black bears, and we started noticing, and everybody knew they're breaking into a whole lot of cars, but we asked, what kind of cars are they breaking into? And overwhelmingly, they preferred minivans. And this result was just so much, I hate to say fun, but I was like, oh my gosh, why minivans? probably pretty obvious because kids are riding around in minivans. There's food all over in the minivans, right? But it just got me really interested in bears. And so I moved on from Yosemite, came to Colorado, and this is about the time we started work on issues here in Colorado with black bears. So really, this story is really just beginning, right? And this is not unique to black bears. This is these issues are not unique to Aspen, and they're not unique to the United States. So wherever we're trying to restore or maintain populations of large carnivores, a lot of the problems are the same, which is how do we live with them? More and more people, how do we live with them in our urban environments? How do we live with them in our agricultural environments? And so I'm doing work all over the place on different species with all the same kind of problem and looking for more solutions. And so I'm going to stop there and just say we should celebrate where we are with carnivore recovery, because I would argue no time in human history have we really been in this kind of situation where we have so many people, but we also have a lot of carnivores on the landscape. And I think instead of it being a negative topic all the time, we should step back a little bit and say, all right, this is pretty cool. We got a lot of, especially here in the United States, we've done pretty well. We have work to do, right? But we've done pretty well. But we've lost, or we're rediscovering, or we're learning new ways to live with these critters. And so that's what I want to discuss tonight, focused on black bears, focused on your wonderful town of Aspen. So this is the plan. I'm going to try to provide a fair bit of science. We'll focus on bear behavior, bear populations. We'll also throw in a little bit about human behavior, and then very exciting garbage experiments. I know you can't wait for that. And then I'll end with a little personal story that tries to get at what is the role of science in this issue, what's wrong with Aspen, and then what's wrong with me, okay? So hopefully we can answer all those questions. And so again, you're probably wondering, what am I talking about? Well, for a while, several years, I was really kind of fed up. The science was very clear to me, and I was giving talks, and often I would have a slide like this, where part of my description of Aspen was the garbage pit of the world inhabited by uncaring, mean, evil, nasty people. And I would contrast that with the second part of our bear research, which we moved into Durango. It's the golden city of all good things inhabited by caring, loving, smart people. So, how does a guy like me get off saying something like that, right? That's ridiculous. Let me try to explain a little bit. But the point here is that we had two studies, one from 2006 through 2011 here in Aspen. We moved to Durango 2011 to 2018. And in fact, we're still continuing at a low level, and I'll touch on that as well. We've seen this population growth of bears. These are just kind of guesses. Don't use that as a quote. This is the red is basically human development in bear country. So lots of human development. This is 2010. I'm sure it's even more now. But the point being is, right, we got a lot of bears, we got a lot of people. So conflict is almost inevitable. And this is just starting to track that conflict beginning in the 1980s or 1986. It only goes to 2003. You can imagine that that projection has gone up since then. Maybe it's leveled off now. I'm not exactly sure. But the point being here is conflict was on the rise as bear populations recovered. We all know the consequences of bear-human conflict in these urban environments. it's bears breaking into things, so there's a lot of property damage. It's a little bit of human health and safety, right? Bears can be dangerous in certain situations, but it's also people having to manage bears and handling bears, euthanizing bears, and so there's a lot of consequences for bears. And then there's probably important consequences that don't get recognized as much of conflict between groups of people. So this issue can be very controversial. This is the worst case scenario, right, where we're having to euthanize bears, and this happens. It's part of this equation. But what my job is, the science I'm supposed to do, is to try to minimize this, and so that's where I focus. The fact that I have this sort of mission is, you can see how bias enters into my science. It's a very directed kind of thing I'm trying to do. It's like I want to get so that the conflict is minimized. This really is, there are important questions here that our society, that you need to think about, is, because we can have a relationship where, bears are coming in, we know why they're coming in, they're coming after our food and our garbage, and, it could be that, well, we kill more bears and the problem goes down, but the problem doesn't necessarily really get resolved. Are we okay with that relationship? Some people might be, other people are not, but that's an important question to answer. The idea of coexistence is really founded on 4 principles. It's, let's have sustainable, healthy populations of carnivores. Let's have thriving human endeavors. Let's have minimal conflict between bears and people, and then minimal conflict between people and people. And that's what we're after when we say coexistence. So it's important to define that term. And then what can research do to help? So think about that question as we move forward. These kinds of projects are team efforts. And I'm up here representing my agency, but critical in this whole equation was Colorado Parks and Wildlife. They were really supportive in the partnership that we formed in doing this research. We recruited 2 students that specifically worked on Aspen. Sharon Broke-Morto, she's in the middle on that upper left. And then David Lewis, who's on the right, upper right. So they were graduate students at Colorado State University. And we had the university support as well as folks like here in ACES. And then I want to also point out, importantly, Heather Johnson down at the lower right. When we moved from Aspen to Durango, CPW really took over the research and really led it, and she was the lead researcher on the team, and just a wonderful individual. So loved working with her. But so that's the team. Here's Aspen without the terrible language in it. You guys are familiar with Aspen. But here's also Durango. Again, we worked in there from 2011 to 2018. Importantly, and part of this little bit of the background of my frustration with Aspen is there were components of Aspen that wanted us to do the research, but as we talked about continuing it, there was less and less support really for our research team. Durango, on the other hand, was really welcoming in a way that Aspen wasn't, and that afforded us the opportunity to do some really important work that I'm going to share with you. So that's kind of the backdrop behind why we went to Durango. So you guys, I'm giving you a real high overview of this, of all our work, okay? So I'm not going to go into detail about anything. I just want to give you a sense of what we did, and also a kind of an overview of the results, so that you come away with some key take-homes. But at both study sites, there was an intensive effort to capture bears and put on GPS collars. I'll show you pictures of that. We monitored bear mortality, so what was killing bears. We were in the dens every year. So every bear we collared, we would climb in the den in the wintertime, and we would change out the collar, and then we'd take a bunch of data off how many cubs were did they have, how many survived the first year, all kinds of body measurements on the various animals, which was really important for our research. And then, of course, we're monitoring conflict. We were monitoring natural food. Hopefully that makes sense here in a minute. And then doing these different experiments to try to figure out, can we reduce the conflict? So this is just an idea of, we handled a whole bunch of bears, all without any consequences for people or bears. We use these cage traps, marked about 150, or attached GPS collars, about 150 bears. Just a picture of a bear with the collar on it. This is an anesthetized bear, so it's just sleeping, and then we, take all the data and measurements and things and attach a collar. So here are some of your Aspen bears from 2006 through 2011. I'm not sure why it's advancing, but this is a female, and her name was 919, okay? And what I'm going to show you here is, so you see 3 different colors, and each dot represents a location of that bear at that particular time. And I'm not sure why this is doing this, but so the yellow dots were 2008, red dots 2007, green dots 2005. So the bear's wearing the collar each, it's for those 3 consecutive years. This is really important. And I'll tell you why in a minute. I want to introduce you to another bear. This is a male, and this is its locations. And first thing you can notice between males and females, just notice the scale, especially those yellow dots, how much the males move versus the females. You can see Aspen, right? Relative to here, Aspen's kind of a small thing, right? So males can move a whole lot more than females, right? Which is not all that surprising, but I'm not sure why this is auto-advancing. If anybody knows how to solve that problem, I'll take their help. But the other thing is, look at the contrast between 2007 and 2008. 2008 is in the yellow, 2007 is in the red. 2007, it was really located on Aspen, right? And pretty much stayed there versus 2008. So we're seeing some really interesting patterns already, right? We'll get into that here in a second. This is the city of Durango under all those dots, right? Each color represents a different bear, and all those are locations. So this is all data that we were using to inform our science. We're up to close to 1 million locations that we were able to really look at bear behavior and movement with that data. All right, so very briefly, each place we monitored some key foods for bears, natural foods, right? Gamble oak, chokecherry, crabapple, serviceberry, pinyon pine. All these are really important foods, especially kind of mid to late summer into the fall when bears are trying to fatten up for hibernation. These are really important foods for bears. And understanding how much is out in the environment is really important for us to understand bear behavior, because during certain years we would see what we call natural food failures. And what that means, and you can see an example here in 2012, that vertical line, that dashed line, is a natural food failure year. So there was very little natural food available for bears. And it can be caused by drought, or it can be caused by a real late freeze that kills the blossoms of these flowering plants. So just keep that in your head, the importance of natural food failure years. All right, so let's dig into a little bit of behavior. A couple more Aspen bears. There's a female, number 4, and then a male, number 32. And we're going to look at some of its movement behavior, okay? And the way we've done that, we've taken those dots that we had put, and we've kind of summarized and collected it all into forming what we call a home range. And so each map represents a home range for one particular bear during one particular year. So this is 2005, 2007, over on the right, upper right, 2008, 2009, okay? Now, 2007 on the right and 2009 on the right were bad natural food years, okay? The red that you're seeing represents urban development, basically the city of Aspen. So what are we seeing? Good food years, they're staying out of Aspen, right? Bad food years, inside of Aspen, okay? This is that male, and again, a couple things, same kind of pattern. Here's a bad food year, good food year over here. We're seeing this male have a very small home range, all focused on Aspen during the bad food years. Good food years, it's out and about. It's traveling all over, big, huge home range, not a whole lot of time in Aspen. Durango, this is the exact same pattern. I'm going to show you these, each little pin represents a location of a bear. This is a good food year. You can see Durango down in kind of the center, bottom center. The bear is just outside of Durango doing its thing, not causing any trouble. 2012, a bad food year. Bear's moving around a lot, ends up down in Durango, okay? So, good food year. Next year, it's out of the city. This should be start telling a pretty compelling story that most bears will choose to stay out of urban environments during good food years. It's not universally true. Sometimes you develop an individual that kind of prefers coming into town and staying in town. Those individuals tend to be euthanized fairly quickly. And to summarize all of that, this is sort of a heat map. The blue means not a lot of time that a bear, and this is, by the way, compiled across all the information we had about across all the individuals. So blue is where they're kind of avoiding, not coming into using areas. The red is where they're concentrating their activity. So good food year, bad food year, okay? Really, really clear message here. Natural food failures are a critical driver of conflict behavior in these urban environments. With the climate changing, some interesting questions there, right? The other thing we can do with all those locations is we can do something what we call backtracking. And so we go to a point and we say, what was the bear doing at that point? So you imagine we have to kind of get the data quickly and within 24 hours go to that location and find out what was going on at that location. We didn't do that at all the locations. We focused mostly on kind of the urban area of Aspen, but we backtracked a lot of these locations. So each point on there represent a place where we went to that point and we asked, what was the bear doing in this location? Mostly we were looking for evidence of it feeding on something, all right? Why were we asking this question? We wanted to know what were they getting into when they were coming into town? What was the major attractant for them, okay? And that was the driving point of doing this work. And so these are just examples. You go to that GPS location, you say, what were they getting into? Oh, they're garbage cans. Sometimes we'd find, pardon me, deer carcasses. Sometimes we'd find they were feeding in berry patches, things like that. So this, we're kind of doing some CSI work, if you will. What did we overwhelmingly find? These bars right here, right here, right here, and right here, garbage, okay? And some of the other things we're looking at is like insects carrion, ripe fruit, house, fry oil, car, barbecue, bird feeder. Those really don't come out as signals. It's garbage, right? So this really points us towards what should we focus on. Durango, exact same results. These are all just locations of conflict. And this is just quantifying what was the public reporting. Overwhelmingly, food trash, garbage, as cause of conflict. So take-home message, availability of garbage is really an important driver of conflict. So all this work, while we're doing this work in Aspen, we were monitoring mortalities. We were seeing like individuals die, asking what did they die of. And we started getting interested in this question of how are we, and I say we, like the kind of the city of Aspen, how is that impacting, let's just say it, the local bear population, right? If we go out maybe 20 miles or 10 miles out of Aspen, what is the impact of this urban environment on the bear population? And it could be, well, it's actually good for bears because they get more food and then they reproduce more. Or it could be, well, they come into town and there's more mortality. And what is that trade-off? And so one of my graduate students worked on this question for his thesis, and he was very good at mathematics and modeling. And we developed this model that strongly indicated, like, I think these urban areas during bad food years may act as a sink for the bear population. A sink being a place where they go and the population is negatively impacted, right? So they go and the mortality is much higher. And now granted, this is just a kind of a population model. You want to support that with empirical data. And that was the point of the next 6 years. We wanted to do that work here in Aspen. We weren't getting a lot of buy-in, so we went to Durango to really focus on this question. Does that make sense? And when you're studying the bear populations, or any population really, why do we want to focus on females? Because females are always the most important, right? I mean, we should know that, right? Okay. So all our efforts were on collaring females. We measured reproduction by climbing into dens, right? And then we were counting bears in a different way, and I'm going to share some of that methodology with you. This is just pictures of people climbing into dens. See, I'm the smart guy in the green jacket on this one. I'm like holding somebody's foot while Heather would climb in the den, okay? Or we'd find very small people and recruit them because those were the best. But we'd get in these dens, we'd pull the bears out if we could, start measuring them. And then the worst part of it, I mean the hardest part of this job was counting the cubs. I mean, it was just a horrible job because you kind of gotta hold the cubs. These are my family on one of the dens we worked. And it's my older daughter Sage, who's sitting right here. And then my younger daughter Logan, and my wife and my family up in the upper left here. So was this hibernating time? This was hibernating time, yes. Okay, so another thing you do when you're counting bears is you can use DNA and some sophisticated quantitative modeling to come up with like how many bears are in an area. So this is Durango, the city of Durango. We put this imaginary grid around it, and each cell we would go in and put what we call a hair trap, okay? Why were we doing this? And this is an example of a hair trap. It's just barbed wire wrapped around trees, and then you put kind of a stinky bait in the middle. Bears would go through the barbed wire to check out the stinky bait. They'd leave a little sample of hair, okay? So we would use that hair, we'd take that to the genetics lab, figure out, oh, it's individual whatever, and then once we have enough of that kind of information, we're able to develop a pretty good estimate of the population, okay? So I have to tell, like, what makes a good bear biologist? See, this is a really good bear biologist because this person is smiling and they're holding this unbelievably horrible smelling thing. And that thing is called mung. And how you make mung is you get a 50-gallon barrel and you go to the fish hatchery and get all their dead fish and you stick them in burlap sacks and you stuff all these sacks and fill this 50-gallon drum, and then you let that sit out in the hot sun and cook for like a month, okay? And and you know it's ripe when all the maggots are just like spilling out, okay? And so this person's job is go grab one of those sacks, carry it, like backpack in 3 miles, and hang that at this spot, okay? And if they're smiling, you're like, that's a bear biologist right there. I would always vomit, by the way, so I'm really not a bear biologist. Here's what we learned from all that combined effort. This is an indication of abundance in that grid. Remember that grid around Durango? Roughly about 170 to 200 bears from 2011, 2012. Here's that bad food year. What happens to the population? It takes a nosedive, right? By 57%, which is a pretty big deal. You don't see that in the literature of a bear population going down that way. The point here is that these urban environments can be hard on the local bear population, okay? What some of the mortality factors were: roadkill, conflict removal, I think is here, harvest. All three of those really go up. And the surprising one is roadkill. And a lot of that roadkill is the cubs. So there's a lot of vulnerability when they come into these urban environments. So that's an important lesson to take home. So you would ask, well, okay, the bear population decreases a lot. What we should see is then, well, the conflict should go down. If there's a linkage between how many bears are in the landscape and levels of conflict, we should see a decrease in conflict. And again, here's the bear population trajectory. Here's our measurement of conflict in the Durango area: 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014. And then we have two kinds of measurements here. Here's the problem year, right? The natural food year, food failure year. We don't see conflict taking a nosedive. Okay, so there's no correlation between this drop in bear population and a drop in conflict. It's a really important point to think about. This data is hard to get. It's probably not the best, but it sure gives a story about, like, okay, just taking a bunch of bears out may not actually decrease conflict. Okay, you've seen that take-home message. So we've got all this information. Again, part of also the research was, what can we do to minimize conflict? We know it's an issue of garbage. We know that. So how do we decrease availability of garbage in these urban environments? This work we started in Aspen, trying to understand, like, going out and doing bear aware campaigns, putting up signs, don't put food in these big garbage bins, get bear-proof containers. There's a lot of different messaging that's very important about what to do with garbage in a way that will help minimize it. We wanted to understand, okay, well, does this help the problem? Take-home message is we saw no response from our experiments with, like, putting out signs, doing bear-aware programs. Okay, this is just an example of, or shows you a little bit about where we did these bear-aware programs, tried to evaluate whether they were effective in changing human behavior. Again, take-home message is no real effect. The only experiment where we started to see a little change in what people did with their food was when we went into the downtown. We got the Aspen PD to help us, and we actually did a little experiment where the Aspen PD would give out tickets to some people and not to others. And that was the only time that we saw a little bit of an effect in that the behavior of people in minimizing their availability of garbage changed. Okay, so am I saying education does not work? No, I'm not saying that. And what I'm saying is education alone will not solve this problem. And it's an important message because there's some people out there saying, oh, we can educate our way out of this problem. And I'm not a proponent of that. In fact, this article is an argument in the opposite. That education's important, but so is a lot of other things. Law enforcement, public engagement, getting your government to think about this issue in a better way. If you want an example of a highly effective government, look no further than Snowmass. Their program there is outstanding. It's a model throughout the country of how to really reduce garbage and have a beneficial effect of reducing conflict, okay? I'm going to talk about another model now that comes out of our research in Durango. And this was an experiment where we really, all we wanted to, instead of trying to change people's behavior, we just wanted to know, like, if everybody used bear-resistant containers, what would happen? Like, would that really help? So we set up an experiment in Durango, and this is where the city of Durango was just so wonderful to work with. They were really supportive. They really helped us. We bought 1,000 bear-proof containers, and we put them out in an experimental protocol. Some areas in green every resident got a container. The areas in pink and didn't get any containers, okay? So we have this experimental design. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good, right? Again, the question was, what will happen to conflict? And the response variable, we were just measuring how often do bears get into garbage. And that's what we define as conflict. I'm going to fly through some of the results. Here's the take home. The experiment went from about 2013 through 2016, and the treatment really started about 2014, okay, where we got all the garbage containers out. It wasn't until this year where we realized one of the problems with our experiment was the garbage containers that we gave out that were bear resistant required people latch them. Okay? So after we got that figured out, what we've seen is a real decrease in the conflict, all right? And conflict being, bears actually breaking in and getting to the trash. We went back in 2021, we still see this, okay? So it's a really effective way for dealing with this residential garbage issue. It doesn't address other aspects of like what's going on in downtown Aspen with this, the restaurants and them producing really rich food and making it available for bears and not securing that. This is just one piece of the problem, but it's very compelling. So compelling that the city of Durango saw these results and then invested $600,000 to outfit the rest of the city with bear-resistant garbage containers. And I've been criticized with people like, $600,000, that's a whole lot of money. And yeah, it is. But what kind of relationship do we want with bears? And in the scheme of things, how much are the people spending on this management strategy where bears come into town and all the CPW time, all their energy? I bet you the trade-off is probably very much in favor of buying garbage cans, okay? No one's done the economics or the cost benefit on that, but that's just the cost benefit. There's a lot of reasons to do that, kind of move that direction. And to Aspen's credit, I know there's been a lot of efforts to move that way and been some real progress there since we've left. So I'm not criticizing Aspen saying they haven't done that, but I think there's more work to do here. Here's a take home. It's really a human behavior issue. This is not about bears. This is about people. If we want to really reduce this problem, it's about what we do. And it's about how we want to manage our foods that are very attractive to bears. And so that's really the basis, the fundamentals of the Aspen and Durango work. I will just end by saying we recruited another PhD student. Her name is Cassandre. She's doing some really cool work. It's not so much ecological. We're moving into the sociological world because it is so much about people. But she's helping to evaluate this initiative that the governor of Colorado made available $100 million to towns throughout Colorado. And they had to apply, and there was like a evaluation. 10 towns were selected, and so they got a chunk of money to go in and try to use that money to clean up their garbage, to buy new containers, to develop education programs, things like that. Cassandre is involved in that work, and so that's part of her PhD process or program at CSU. Okay, that's the end of my talk. Now you're probably wondering, what is the rest of the story, right? Okay, here's the story. We're done with slides. So after all this work, very hard work, like I'm feeling like, dang it, I know the answer, and dang it, Aspen has been a pain in my rear for a very long time. And I'm a little bit bitter, right? And so you got a bitter scientist with a lot of data on his hands. That's bad, right? And then getting a little bit of attention, so this bitter scientist with data on his hands is starting to get an ego, okay? And part of that ego is from this author, Mary Roach, okay? And the book Fuzz. So she was very interested. This is a book about human-wildlife conflict. It's a great book. Chapter 2 is about Aspen, and it's about the Aspen issues, and she focuses on bears. And so she came up here. I took her around. I had her visit people at CPW, visit people at the city, people in Snowmass. Anyway, like when somebody, a best-selling author, kind of focuses on your work, your ego keeps building, right? It's like, oh, this is good. I'm right, okay? So, and like, I'm going to stick it to Aspen because they've been a pain in my butt and they're not listening to my science. And anyhow, so every year I do this annual backpacking trip with my younger daughter or whoever wants to go. But in this particular case, it was with my younger daughter. And she plays soccer, and we were running late. We had to get up like 5 miles in, and we weren't getting to the trailhead till late. And it was like, dang it, rush. Of course, it's peach season, so we're bringing some snacks. And there might have been like a bag of jalapeno cheddar chips or something like that. But there were some peaches. Anyhow, we get to the parking lot of the trailhead, and I'm like, come on, let's go. And I'm in a big rush, and we start hiking. We get to our favorite place. We have a great night. We could only spend one night. And pack up, and we're coming back next morning. And I'm walking down the trail. Oh, and by the way, Mary Roach had just read the chapter to me. Like, it hadn't been published, so I was just like, yes, we're going to stick it to Aspen, because she has some pretty funny stuff here in this book about Aspen. You have to read it. Things that I can't say, she was able to say. So it was pretty fun that way. And anyhow, we're hiking back down the trail, and we run into a gentleman coming up the trail, and he's just like so excited. And he says, there was a bear breaking into a car last night. I was like, oh, really? Okay. And what kind of car? He's like, I don't know. And so we keep hiking down, run into another couple. Oh my God, a bear broke into a car in the parking lot. I'm like, oh yeah, you know what kind of car? No, but it was blue. I'm like, And then, by the time, like, we're running into people, everybody's just like, by the time, like, I was halfway down, just like, shut up, I don't want to hear about the bear breaking into my car. And sure enough, get down there, and there's my car. The bear had just pulled open the door, bent it open, windows all blown out. Sitting in the middle of my driver's seat is the peach pit. And then there's a note from the ranger, come see me. And And I'm just going, no, this can't be. Like, how do I stop Mary from publishing this book, right? Like, no. Anyway, go up to the ranger, and the ranger is, he's, giving me the whole thing. I'm just like, and literally, I parked in front of a sign that said, do not leave food in your car. Like, use this bear box right here. I was parked right in front of that thing. Like, this sign was glaring, like, don't do this. And there were signs all over, don't leave food in your car. And so I go up to the ranger, and I was just like, you don't know how bad this is. He's like, what are you talking about? I can't talk about it. Could you just give me a ticket? He's like, no, I'm not going to give you a ticket. I was like, oh man, please just give me a ticket, all right? He's like, no, this is bad enough. You can go. I'm like, dang it. So we're driving home, and like, air rushing into the cars. We're driving back and forth. And I could hear my younger daughter in the back, and she started crying. And she's like, I said, what's wrong, honey? And she's like, oh, well, Dad, do you think they're going to kill that bear? And I said, I don't know, but I don't think so. And I truly didn't know. And so we keep driving, and then she starts crying again. I said, honey, what's the matter? She said, Dad, I think this may ruin your reputation. I think you're right. And we had a discussion whether we should not tell anybody or whether we should tell anybody. And we chose the latter. And here's the point. Like, the science is not going to solve this problem. I'm not going to solve this problem. And we don't need inflated egos, and we don't need this kind of rhetoric that just makes people feel bad, things like that. What we need is a community that comes together, makes decisions that are beneficial, not only for the bears, but I think for the town itself. There's a lot of reasons to have a cleaner city. And so I think that's the message. Science will not solve this problem. You guys are going to solve this problem. Some of it has been solved. You guys have done good work here. In my opinion, there's more work to be done, important work. And there's some people in this audience, would you guys, whoever's doing the Bear Coalition, the Bear Aspen stuff, please just stand up. These are all folks that are really important. And talk to them. You guys come together and go bug your city, and get some things moving in a direction. Is it expensive? Might be a little bit expensive. The other thing is, like, CPW, the folks working here on the bears, they're not the enemy. They are truly not interested in euthanizing bears. And the problem is garbage. It's not bears. So that's my message. Thank you for being here. I'm happy to take questions if there's time.
All right, so we're going to do a Q&A session. I'm going to have to let you guys all know this microphone is not like a real microphone, but I'm going to hand it to you because it's going to the online recording. So we'll take questions at this time. We'll start right over here.
How have the efforts for composting affected this? And if we really pushed composting and got people to not put their food in the trash, could that be another way to help?
Yeah, listen, I love composting. I do it myself. I don't live in bear country. If I did live in bear country, I'd be really aware of what compost can attract. But I also raise chickens because, I've got a lot of bear attractants in my yard. And I believe in that kind of stuff. But there's ways to prevent bears from getting into that. So I think the responsible thing to do is, in these small little areas, you can protect that. The thing that really is effective deterrent for bears is electricity. So there's a huge program like in Montana where they have grizzly bears, and kind of the issues are a little bit little bit harder there. You got a species that's still on the endangered species list, but they use electricity to fence bears out of beehives and chicken coops and composting places. All these things that where you're dumping food out, even though you're going to compost it, they're huge attractants. So it's not, yeah, just, I guess the word is, the advice would be like, just be careful with that and think about like how it could attract not only bears, but raccoons and foxes and all kinds of stuff, so.
But I was specifically thinking about, to give Aspen a little plus, the composting program where they have big bins and they put that in and a truck comes by and picks it up so the food itself doesn't enter the garbage cans.
I didn't know, like I don't know about that program. And yeah, I think it sounds like a great program. I think the challenge is how do you put it in a container so bears can't get into it? And I don't know the answer to that. So I guarantee you bears will be interested in that big container. So yeah, it's something to think about, work with their solutions. I guarantee there's solutions.
All right, other questions? Right here.
I was a composter for about 2 weeks until I had bears going over a 6-foot fence too. And we were so good about keeping our garbage in the garage and bringing it out in the morning. My question is, why do bears like birdseed?
Oh, it's just the energy-rich food. So.
But it's tiny little seeds. How do they eat it?
Well, they just probably inhale it, you know. So it's the same with, you know, they eat ants. They'll go into ant mounds, and you're like, well, gosh, that's why are they eating ants or the larvae? Well, each one of those may be like 5 calories, but if you sit there and just suck up 5 calories, you know, and it's probably more like sucking in 10 ants a second, then it probably pays off for them. So birdseed's full of, you know, energy-rich food, and they'll figure that out pretty quickly. Seeds and things like that. So, you know, it's acorns. They love acorns. They love pinyon pine nuts. Those are all very energy-rich food sources, as is birdseed.
Hi there. I'm interested first in what you did to educate people in Durango about using those 600,000 cans to improve your numbers. And second, if you had a wish list, what would be your top 3 things for Aspen Council to do to improve our relationship with bears?
I'm going to answer your first one, and then I'm going to defer to somebody in the audience to answer the second question. So, yeah. You bring up a point that I didn't get into the details of the work, but one of the things we were measuring was compliance, okay? And in this case, compliance was whether they were latching the containers. And when we realized that was an important thing to measure, and a really important component of making sure the experiment was valid, we needed compliance to be very high. And so we did the typical education, but we backed it up with law enforcement. And so we had people going out there and threatening, like, if you don't latch, you know, and people complied. We got compliance to go way up. So that's my point, is like, yeah, education is really important. And law enforcement's probably important as well in that mix. So, okay, for your second question, I think I'm going to look to you to answer that.
I actually spoke at City Council a couple of weeks ago. They were pretty receptive, and so I guess our outlook as this new group would be a similar response to what Dr. Breck had, is helping us to forge ahead with compliance, because you can put all the information out there. You can beg people, you can have bear aware signs and everything, but if people aren't locking their trash and the trash is not being locked, secured, I have a special trash room at my house, then the bears are getting into it. And if there's no repercussions and we don't have the law enforcement, we don't have the city government on our side, then we're just shouting into the wind and hoping that somebody's going to listen, and human behavior is hard to change.
I just want to add something very sweet. It's very quick. I do storytelling to kindergartners, and this 6-year-old girl, I always do bear stories, but so she raises her hand. She's adorable, little girl. She said, we have our garbage cans in our garage. And I said, well, what do you do when you have to put them out? And almost indignantly, she said, well, we lock them. So I am saying that if a 6-year-old can grasp the concept, one would hope that adults will too. But anyway, I just thought that was kind of cute.
All right, we have time for one more question. Oh, there's a lot of hands.
You had asked about what to ask for City Council. So Nicole, who just started the Aspen Bear Alliance, and so part of the goal of the group is to identify where the problems are, trash being the biggest, working with police, working with City Council to really define how to solve that problem. And so going to City Council is going to be critical. And so if you're interested in helping with those efforts, the community effort is huge. The community voice, it's such an important part of this. So please reach out to Nicole or go online to see Aspen Bear Coalition, because that's, that's what's really needed, is to have our voices out there.
All right, I think we're all.
I'm happy to keep going if you
Oh.
want to cut off the TV, whatever. But
Cool, yeah, we'll answer a couple more.
if there's folks that want to ask more questions, I'm happy to answer.
Cool.
So you talked about going into the dens and doing a count, and are there cubs? So when are cubs born?
Good question. So the way bear reproductive ecology works is breeding occurs in the early summer in June. The bears do what's called delayed implantation. So the embryo is not actually implanted until the fall. And it's probably a strategy to assess their condition going into hibernation. So if it's a really bad food year and they don't go in good condition, then that embryo doesn't implant and they won't have any young. If they're fat and happy bears, then you may end up with 2 or 3 cubs that are born in the middle of winter, and they're tiny, and they crawl up and they start suckling, and that's what they do for a few months for the first year. They stay with mom throughout the year and go back into the den as yearlings, and they stay with mom one more season in the den. And so when we go into a bear den, it could be that there are no cubs, there are young cubs, and we would kind of know, because we would know the individual. And if we knew that they were having young cubs of the year, then we'd kind of really put off until we went into the den. And so, that'd be like in March or sometimes early April. And then the other times we would go in sort of midwinter, January, February timeframe.
So sometimes when you go in, do you encounter the mom awake? And
She was usually awake. So they're remarkably tolerant. We only had a few kind of scary incidents. Scary is maybe not the right word. There are a couple females, like the first time they do it, they're just like, what are you doing, And sometimes you'd go in with a stick that you could inject the mother with, Other times you go in with a little dart rifle. So sometimes it's kind of close quarters. If you couldn't use a dart rifle, you had to get pretty close. But some of the females, they were getting used to it after the first time, second time, because we go in every year, and we had bears on the air for 4 or 5 years. And some of those bears were getting a little bit testy by the time we were finished. Start puffing at you and snapping their teeth and doing this kind. And if you want to see kind of an exciting event, there's this film called Bears of Durango. It's a great film. It's focused on heather, but it gives all the results of the Durango work. But there's a scene in there where we're all kind of like, oh my God, here comes the bear, and like it's kind of exciting. Generally speaking, all of those events, most events were pretty uneventful. So, and we really worked hard at that. So, yes.
If you're a well-organized community with a great coexistence program and everything intact, and you know that you're in a food failure year, do you take steps to positively intervene for the bear population, or do you let the chips fall as they may?
Well, it's a great question. I don't know if I have a great answer. Your levels of conflict are going to probably go up. Somebody asked a similar question last night down in Carbondale, but rephrased it a little bit, and I think I'm going to repeat that question because I think it gets at what you're getting at. But he asked, in these bad food years, what happens to these bears? And the predecessor of all this work was a guy named Tom Beck, who did work on black bears in the 70s, a researcher, way before we had all this urban development. And what he would see during those bad food years is the females, they would go into their den in poor condition. They wouldn't reproduce, but the survival was still really high. So they'd live for the next year, right? And that's a real strategy they have. So they abandon the reproduction to survive another year. But the other part of that is they also move around a lot, right? Searching for food. So inevitably, you're going to have more bears searching, coming around. And it's a hard question. And, like understanding these places like Snowmass and Durango that are successful, like learning from them during those bad food years is an important question to answer, because we don't have a lot of data that way. Like where towns and cities are really successful at cleaning things up, what happens during these bad food years? It probably adds a different challenge, right? So.
All right, so we have to end the presentation format right now, but if you guys have any further questions for Dr. Breck, please feel free to come up afterwards. Yeah, or we can just keep going, right? Some of us have to get going.